This section of the course covers brain loads that can be added to any of the core games to alter the challenge, allowing you to customize it for the person you're working with.
There's a wide variety of what we call cognitive and sensory loads to incorporate into each of those structures. So there's the auditory, add the vestibular, add the motor challenges, cognitive loads, language loads, mathematical loads, visual perceptual loads, visual discrimination loads, visual memory loads, to really nurture and enrich the entire process that's taking place within the brain.
There's really no limit to the number of cognitive and sensory brain loads you can add to increase or decrease the complexity of the multi-matrix game. In this section, we'll cover just a few brain load options. Before long, you'll be inventing your own. The first kind of load to add is a language load. Do this by having the player name the items he or she is moving. Dr. Hillier demonstrates.
A, B, like that, just putting them on the empty spot. The next level would be saying the color from which you pick up the block and the color onto which you place the block. So it would be A, orange, blue, B, green, orange. The next level would be actually saying the letter that you lift it from and place it to. So it would be A, Q, E, B, R, Q. When we add the language component to the activity, we have the letters up, and they have to actually speak the letters as they go in alphabetical sequence. And if a child can, you might even ask them to say a word that has that letter in it. And this creates the opportunity for them to think in sequential language modes of thinking.
To increase the cognitive or thinking challenge for that kind of language load, you could also ask them to create sentences out of the letters they're moving. Or you might ask them to rhyme. For example, they might have to create a word that starts with the letter on the white block they just moved, then create a rhyming word out of the letter on the colored block they're moving to. The next kind of load is auditory. Do this by having the player contend with sounds while playing the game. These can even be simulated sounds that mimic their school or work environment, particularly if the person struggles to stay focused on a task when there's noise in the room, such as distracting music, or someone calling out random numbers.
4, 2, 7, 3, 9, blue, red. When we do this as a therapist, when we're calling out other numbers as she's trying to process her own sequence of numbers, we're actually developing a concept called freedom from distractibility. Because in real life, we're dealing with multisensory issues. In the classroom, for example, there's talking, there's the visual displays, there's a teacher talking, there's things you have to be looking at. And at home, at homework time, we have dinner being made, the TV's on, your brother's bothering you, and all these things are happening. So what you can do with each of these layouts is add these challenges to it that help develop the ability to contend with these other inputs that are always around in your environment. You can learn how to not ignore but not be a victim of, say, auditory information in your environment.
Auditory brain loads include talking while the person plays the game. A higher level would be expecting them to respond to what you're saying.
What did you have for breakfast this morning?
Cereal.
Cereal. And what kind of cereal?
Adding auditory loads to a game creates interaction between the visual and auditory systems. The ability of these two systems to work together efficiently is at the heart of many reading problems, because reading is essentially the act of discerning visual language symbols, while auditorially distinguishing subtle differences in language sounds. To add a mathematical brain load to a game, place the numbers face up on both the bottom and the top blocks.
And we work with the numeral sequences, the numbers 1 through 24, to do a mathematical kind of activity, which is really the other side of the brain. So it would be like this, where you identify the number underneath the block you lift it from, and also identify the number that you place it onto. So it would be 1, 5, 17, 2, 18, 5. An even higher level would be adding the numbers that you place it onto, such as when I place this number 1 block on here, I add the 2 and I say 19. Then I pick up this next block and I add the next 2 numbers together, which would be 19. Now I'm looking for the number 3 block. 3 plus 12 is 15. So now 5. Now I'm looking for the 5 block. 5 plus 5 is 10. So I voice the 10. Now I'm looking for 6. My number 6 block is here. I say 27.
To vary the challenge, you might have them add the numbers in their head as demonstrated before, but subtract 1 from the total before saying it out loud. To increase the cognitive challenge, they might add 4 to only even numbers and subtract 2 only from odd numbers. You can create any number of math brain loads by requiring an interaction between numbers or dots on the white die with those on the colored die. Anytime you can add a vestibular load to the game, you'll increase the therapeutic benefits.
The vestibular system is actually the foundation for vision development. So adding a vestibular load to the matrix game allows the child to learn voluntary control over the eyes when the body's in motion. So one way we can do this is to have a child sit in a spinning chair, for example, look at a display in front of them with the blocks, spin them a few times clockwise, and then place the block where it should go, and then spin them the other direction. This provides an opportunity for the semicircular canals, which are critical for eye tracking, to be more effective for the child. When you rotate your head 90 degrees, your eyes want to rotate one way or the other. The eyes want to go back to the easiest position. Even on the playground, when the head turns to see what's going on, the child has to have sufficient visual control to override the vestibular tendency for the eyes not to be in control.
You can add other vestibular loads to any of the multi-matrix games by asking the person to turn to look at something behind them, and the next time turn in the opposite direction. You might even have 2 smaller block setups, forcing the individual to alternate between playing the game in front of them and the game behind them. At that point, you're adding mini brain loads: vestibular, eye movement, visual discrimination, visual memory, and more. You can add a motor brain load, which benefits eye-hand coordination, spatial awareness, and depth perception by how you set up the blocks.
When you put the blocks together, it's more of a challenge to have that fine motor skill. If you move them further apart, it's a little bit easier. So that's how you regulate the challenge, and you slowly compress the blocks together to further nurture their ability to have that fine motor coordination.
Placing the big blocks on top definitely adds a motor load, as does attempting to go faster with the bigger blocks balancing on the smaller ones.
One of the most integral parts of the game, of course, is eye-hand coordination. And we know the vast majority of children in elementary school really don't have the fine motor skill to be efficient and relaxed with handwriting. I mean, you can go into almost any classroom in the country and you see children struggling with their pencil grip, typically because they haven't developed the fine motor skill necessary to control a small pencil. So the game, by its nature, involves the use of the thumb and the forefinger to manipulate these blocks in a rather finessed way.
A favorite motor load is to require the individual to lift a left or right foot or slap the table with the left or right hand, depending on which block is moved. For example, you might require that the left foot be raised each time the person comes to an odd number or to a vowel. Of course, this is also a cognitive load because the person has to think about what item they're on and take a corresponding action.
One way you might encourage greater fine motor development with this game is through finger opposition. That is, using your thumb and your index finger, your thumb and your middle finger, your thumb and your ring finger, your thumb and your pinky finger to move the blocks. And this is great for those that play keyboard or guitar or learning how to type. I might have the player use beginner chopsticks to move the blocks, or wear thin gloves to contend with a different texture, or to inhibit the tactual conformation of the block that they're feeling, which is of benefit to professionals who want to move efficiently in a job where gloves are required.
One example of a cognitive load would be to have the individual contend with what's being said in the room while playing the game. If a particular word is heard, the individual might have to stop adding numbers on the blocks and begin subtracting them. This forces sustained attention to both the game being played and the chatter in the room. This load develops working memory, as the person has to not only remember what word they're listening for, they have to remember the rule change they're to do when they hear that word, as well as remember where they're at in the game.
One of the biggest cognitive areas that impact performance are working memory and sustained attention, because cognition or cognitive activities are what bog people down. Cognitive fatigue. And people always experience this in a long test or trying to endure a lengthy homework assignment. So we increase the cognitive demand, or we increase the thinking challenge with any setup we might have. And then we try to push that time limit a little bit. When you start to feel like you can't do it anymore, then we want to take a break. We don't want you to be less than 80% successful.
Dr. Hillier invented the game originally to benefit his vision therapy patients. And in fact, the game itself automatically develops both ocular motor skills and visual perceptual skills. However, there are loads you can add to target specific visual skills.
the width of the display on the table can significantly enhance or detract from an individual's ability to contend with whatever project you have them working on. For example, a very wide display would cause an increased challenge to their peripheral vision, to their tracking skills, to get out to the periphery, and actually stretching and strengthening the muscles that cause the eyes to go to their widest extreme to be able to gather information from a broader area of visual space.
The game box also comes with visual brain load cards. Use the symbol card, visual figure ground, and visual closure with the symbols die. No matter what game you design for the person you're working with, always practice learning theory.
Learning theory is probably one of the most important concepts that should be in the background of your mind as you're doing this activity. Learning theory means that you want to be 80 to 100% successful. And what this means is that you can be challenged but yet successful at the same time. So if you're less than 80% successful, it gets kind of frustrating because you're not really experiencing success. On the other hand, if you're always at 100%, it's kind of boring and there's no real benefit to what you're doing. It's kind of a waste of time.
Adding and combining various brain loads and increasing or decreasing the challenge or speed are the ways in which you can ensure the player stays in that 80 to 100% range. You're in control of the game and its benefits.